welcome to the third episode of the Music Mind Lab. My name is Kayleen, and today I'm joined by Charie. Charie is an amazingly talented young violinist and pianist, and I'm so excited to have her here with us today. So, can you please introduce yourself a bit to us? So, tell us how you started those instruments and how long you've been playing them.
I started piano when I was 5 and I started violin when I was 6. Like when I was a kid, my parents would just be like, do you want to play the piano? Because they had my sister put into piano and they would always like make me watch her practice and be like, you want to be like that when you get to like 5 years old, right? You want to be like that? And I'd be like, as a little kid, I'd just be like, yeah, because it looked cool. And then afterwards, my sister learned violin and they were like, the exact same thing. It was like copy and pasted. They were like, "Do you want to learn violin? That looks cool, right?" And so violin started. And I think like violin, I complained a lot as a kid about practicing because like I felt like piano you could just sit down and start practicing, but like violin was really annoying to me because it's like, what do you mean I have to like rosin and tune and like actually stand up and have good posture?
I relate so much to like everything you just said, especially about like the difficulty picking up the violin to practice versus the piano. I feel like that's not talked about enough. It's so much easier to start practicing the piano. Going back to when you were younger, I know obviously you said you didn't really enjoy practicing as much, neither did I. But back then, was it your parents? Like, did they help like monitor your practice? Like, what was that process like?
When I first started, my parents like they had like this criterion that was like you got to play it 5 times perfectly, and then so that would be like what I would do for everything. And obviously, like when you're a little kid, it's like fine because your whole piece is like 5 notes, right? But like when I started practicing like scales, it would be like at first difficult to get like the coordination right, and I would get really annoyed because it was like 5 times straight, and if I messed up on the fourth time, like I would just have to go back over. I remember being like annoyed with the actual like criterion because I was like that's not fair. Like why do I have to play it 5 times perfectly like straight? Like it's so annoying because then I would just get like really nervous on the fifth time because I felt like I would have to get it done. And I feel like now that I'm thinking back on it, like that was not the best way to practice because then like the goal was to just like get through it instead of actually like thinking about like how I could get better. And also, my parents never really defined perfectly because neither of them played music, so I feel like their equivalent of perfect was like technical perfection, like you just gotta play all the notes right and like do the one forte on the page. That was like it.
I feel like I'm just relating with everything you say, but I feel like the 5 times perfect is a very universal experience for a lot of beginners. And I was wondering, do you still like go by that method? Is that still a part of your practice? Or like, if not, how has your practice changed over the years?
Part of me would love to still be able to do it 5 times perfect, except like now that my pieces are 10 minutes long, like if I had to do that, it would be like 50 minutes of straight technical perfection, and I genuinely just don't think I have the capacity to do that, unfortunately. Like a bigger problem was that they never actually set like a thing for me to practice, and I would just be like, okay, like I can get it done now without having to do it 5 times. So I kind of like cheated my way out of practicing, but that was not a good decision either because that did not help me. Like I was just like I felt like such an accomplished little kid like cheating the system being able to get out of practicing, but then like the moment I realized that practicing miraculously actually helps, like that was not a great realization for me because then I realized like, oh, I've been going about it all wrong. So I guess my practicing now is just like more focused by section, like figure out what you actually need to get done because it's like you could practice, but how do you maximize the efficiency of your practicing? It's like you want to get things done when you practice. Like you could always just run through your piece like 5 times. What does that actually like tell you? It's like you got to be there wholeheartedly when you practice. Like if you're watching YouTube shorts while practicing, you're not going to get like effective practices. And it's like the mindset of going into practicing is like similar to the mindset of writing, I feel like, because when I was like younger, my practice was a lot like doing math problems because it was just like repetitive and you would apply the same subject to everything. But like that was not a good solution because you weren't able to actually bring out like the musical finesse of the actual piece. So if I were to equate it to a subject now, it would be English because when you write, you actually have to like be focused and figure out what you want to convey instead of just like, get the diction right and get the words down on a page, if that makes sense at all.
What you were mentioning earlier, how now that we're older, obviously we have less time to practice and it's more difficult to kind of structure like a lot of time to devote on your practice time. So I was wondering, especially on the days that you don't feel like in the correct headspace to go into practicing, like feeling super focused and super ready, like you're mentioning, how do you like make those days still happen? Like how do you get through those days and still get your practice done?
So, the philosophy of one of my non-music teachers, like we were discussing this and he basically said like no matter how much time school gives you to do your homework, like even if you have like another 70-minute period that is completely dedicated to doing homework, you will never get rid of like the pressure that, or the feeling that you have not enough time. You can have all the time in the world, but like the thing about people is that once they know that they have this specific amount of time, they know that they will be able to drag it out. So I feel like genuinely like when you approach practicing, it's like I always tell myself like there's 24 hours in a day. You spend this much of the day at school and then you spend this much of the day on everything else. And like do you really actually not have enough time or are you just like incompetent, which is maybe like not the best. That's also not the healthiest way to put it, but I feel like it sometimes works because usually when I have like a lot of homework, it's always because I like probably like procrastinated on it or like I stacked it up onto one day. Like bigger thing about finding time to practice daily is like being also able to manage your time and your schoolwork. And obviously that is not an easy thing. Like I don't think anyone is able to perfectly do that, even though some are better than it at others. And I'm not one of those people, unfortunately. But in terms of like practicing on days where I like can't practice, my solution usually is to practice first. Because practicing you can at least attribute like a set amount of time to. You can't really say like, "Oh, I'm going to complete this essay in like an hour" because that never really works out. But practicing you could be like, "Okay, I'll start now, actually lock in and then I'll like stop after like maybe an hour and a half." And then you can kind of like structure your homework time around like practicing. And like I would say if you're not in the headspace, then find something else to do that is equally productive. Like, usually practicing is actually my solution for not being able to do homework. Like, especially like at school, maybe during like a free period, like I can never actually focus. So I would just go practice because you don't necessarily need to have like it's practicing is less based on in the moment than like I would say some homework is because you always like know exactly what you need to do because you've just been doing it for such a long time and you know what parts of the piece that you're struggling on. And like I guess like the more like detail specific work maybe has to be done at home because it's hard to like immediately get into the right headspace when you're practicing. But I would say if you were like struggling to time manage, like lay out your schedule, write it out. Writing it out is actually very helpful because you see like what you do every day and then what are the times like you have nothing. Like I like wrote out my schedule once from like Monday to Sunday and I was like, wow, like I didn't realize I have such little time on like these particular days and I have a lot of times on these particular days, but why does it always feel like I have like the same amount of time? So you just gotta like look at it and be like, am I psyching myself out into thinking that I actually that I don't have enough time, or do I actually not have enough time? And if it's the latter, like find out ways to distribute it. I don't know.
This is like all amazing advice that you're giving. I was also just curious, going into more like the specifics of your practice schedule, like once you get started, do you have any specific techniques that you use to work on difficult passages? Or maybe could you talk about like a specific example of like a passage or a piece that you had a bit of trouble with, and then what practice techniques you use to, work on that?
Perhaps slightly less related to the question at first, but I'm like a huge advocate for playing like a variety of pieces with different textures because I feel like a lot of pianists like their goal obviously competitions is a lot of like a really large part of music sometimes, but like
Hmm.
if the goal of winning a competition is outweighing like your actual musical learning and being able to play like a range of periods, then I feel like you should take a step back because especially in piano it is so important like to learn like a different I guess touches for the piano because you're always going to have a different tone when you're playing Bach versus Japan. And especially when you're recording things for like not for a competition but just for like professors or like people to like critique your playing and examine it, a lot of the times one of their criteria is that you have to play like a Bach prelude and like a fugue or something similar. And then like people genuinely are just like not able to play this because it is so like incredibly different from other things and other like repertoire that they might be playing. The biggest thing that sets you apart from being like metronomic and a robot in music is obviously being able to express different things. I feel like this is a very universal truth that everyone knows. But in order to do this, like you can't just be on like one default setting the entire time. Like in order to bring out different characters, you also have to be able to play different textures, which then requires you to like actually have like an arsenal of different textures, like set textures to be able to call upon when you're doing your playing. I feel like especially for me, when I was younger, I really disliked playing slow pieces, and I also disliked playing pieces by like Mozart, especially, and like also his major pieces, because like the most difficult thing is making it look easy. Like when you're in competitions, like there's so much pressure to pick like a showpiece or pick like a piece that is technically demanding and musically demanding and very obviously everyone can hear and know that it is difficult. But like personally, the hardest pieces and the pieces that have like inspired the most growth have been like the pieces that do not sound demanding at all, and that is the difficulty about them, that you have to make it seem and you have to hide the actual difficulty. And like a lot of people like miss this when they're playing competitive pieces. So I think like part of my advice would just be like don't be 200% locked in on your competition the entire time, because like that is also bad for you. You miss out on like a very integral part of like actually being able to develop your musical capacity. And in terms of like practicing difficult things, like I have a very basic approach to go about it. I mean, for like technically challenging things, I would just do like rhythms. But also, like, obviously practice your scales. Especially as a kid, I hated practicing my scales. And like what that led to was like I had atrocious like hand posture on piano for like years, because when I would play like arpeggios, I would stretch my hand like this, and that would lead to like the side of my wrist tendons like basically destroyed, and then that gives you like low-key tendonitis and a lot of like wrist issues. So I would say definitely make sure the way that you're practicing and like your hand structure is not like detrimental to your hand, because you don't want to sacrifice your bodily function. This is like sort of a given, but yeah.
I'm just gonna like circle back to what you were saying earlier. About choosing repertoire, that's definitely something I resonate with hugely, because I've had experiences where, I've been like learning a Bach prelude and fugue, and my teacher would be like, "You're playing it so romantically, like this is not the correct style." It's because I had become so accustomed by, only really focusing on practicing these like beautiful romantic pieces that I thought were pretty and nice to play. And so I was lacking like the musical knowledge and like actual like understanding of how to play things from different periods, for sure. So like for me, like those preludes and fugues were like immensely helpful pieces of repertoire. What were some other like specific pieces of repertoire that helped you, I guess?
Mozart concertos, all the sonatas, all the early classical things. Oh, I did not like it at all whatsoever. It would be like, especially the ones that are like, the fortes are not true fortes, and the touch is like, it's like a feather. Like probably the phrase I've heard most common was that like you're being too aggressive and you're like attacking the keys in a way that's like not fitting the style. I feel like the violin to piano struggle is real, because like in violin you can kind of tell when you're like doing something wrong because it's like audible. But like in piano it's like to like a professional it's very like clear when you do something wrong, but when you're actually playing it, like there's not technically like something wrong with the sound. You could play everything in the wrong style, but there's nothing like actually wrong with it. So it's like it's so much thinking. Like I remember like one of my biggest fears when I was a kid was like having a huge memory slip. I once had an adjudicator tell me, if you are focusing on the story of the piece, you will never have a memory slip. And like that was such an interesting thing to think about when I was actually there. This kind of goes into like preparing yourself for a performance, but I feel like during a performance, it's like if you think about the actual state of the performance, like that is never good. For example, it's like, oh no, like this passage is difficult. And if you think about it from that standpoint, you're gonna mess up. Like the time to worry about your intonation is not 30 minutes before you have to like actually play. You know what I mean? Like that's like 3 months before when you're like practicing and drilling like the section and etc. But it's like before your performance, what you should be thinking about is like what you want to convey. You have to think about what you want to express because that is the only thing you can change in the moment. So like really funny story, in sixth grade I had like a concerto competition and I was about to go on with my accompanist because I went first, and right before that my first thought was, like the beginning is very exposed. What if I just messed up the beginning? You can guess what happened. That is exactly what happened. I messed up and I looked at the adjudicator and went, "Can I restart?" And then he just looked at me like it wasn't even a look of like disappointment or anger or etc. He just looked at me and he looked very interested and he was like, "Yes." And that was genuinely one of the most like weird experiences I've ever had, because it was like the second time I played it, my mindset was just like, like it's gone. I might as well just do it. And the funniest thing was I played the beginning exactly the same. I played it equally wrong because I had still not recovered from like believing that I could not play it properly. So I played it exactly perfectly as wrong as I did it the first time, except this time I just went with it. I was like, just continue whatever you do, like at this point, be confident in your wrong beginning. And like this is like one of like the life lessons low-key I've learned from music, because it's like at what point do you just like sacrifice it and continue for like the goal of actually doing a complete performance? Like I'm sure the adjudicator would have rather me like skip the beginning and played everything else rather than like continuously stop and ask to restart, because at that point it's just like, and my favorite thing about that entire experience was that during the masterclass after it, he asked me, why did you restart? Did you just not like the beginning? And this also opened like another like field of possibilities to me, because it is so important to convey that you want to convey that people like in like competitions, like literally Chopin competition, if you want to like go that far, they will stop and restart not because they did anything technically wrong, not because they had like a huge memory slip that like I did, but just because it didn't feel right. And like I low-key think that might be like one of the most beautiful parts of music, because it's just like it's so subjective and it's so important to convey that what you actually want to convey, that it's like people can overlook your technical mistakes. People can even overlook like having like a supposedly bad performance if you just like you're like the end product of it is what you actually wanted to get to, especially on piano. Elementary through middle school, I stopped like maybe last year, but my teacher would literally make me play 4 pieces per year, and it would be like each of the periods. And I feel like a lot of people hate playing Baroque music. Like I will just like put that out there. Like especially like on piano, like they just don't like it. But it's like Baroque music is like a lot of what I played when I was like in elementary school, because like like Bach Festival, like I would play like the French suites and etc. I feel like that builds the foundation for every other era, because what you have in like especially Bach music is you have 3 different voices, and then this like having 3 different voices is like such a difficult thing to do, and it's like especially when you have like Urtex, like an Urtex edition, like they don't put any dynamics, they don't put like anything on the music. It is just the notes and like perhaps like one footnote that's like, oh, actually we changed a single trill. Like that's what we have. That's what you have in like the edition. And I feel like it's so interesting because then everyone plays it the exact same way, because Baroque music is supposed to be so intuitive. Like looking at the music and looking at the phrasing, looking at the voices, you are just able to figure out where like, with a formula, like when you go up, your dynamic goes up. Like maybe that's the one thing you need to play Baroque music. Like you're kind of able to just like figure out like which parts need to be brought out. And that's like so important when you're figuring out more complex, like maybe romantic music. Like, okay, in Chopin Ballades, there's obviously not just like one line to it. And especially like, I feel like a helpful tool that I do is like, I use so much color on my pieces. Like, my pieces are at this point, like, not just like performative art. It's literally an actual art piece because everything is just highlighter. And also, I'm very liberal with my use of like markings. Like, especially if I keep forgetting something, like I'll take a 9B pencil, draw like 5 circles around like a single note. So figure out the music, like at this point, just annotate it. Like that would be my advice. It's useful.
In Baroque music, I think what you said was very interesting to me because you said like it's quite intuitive for people like when you're learning Baroque music, but actually in my experience I feel like it's been kind of the opposite, because I feel like when there are so many voices like happening at the same time, it's like the decision of like what do you voice? Like voicing, I feel like it has always been like a very big struggle for me. Because like obviously like the shaping and everything, it can seem intuitive. Oh, like the rise and the fall, like it goes up, it goes down, crescendo, decrescendo. But like, how do you actually add nuance to it? Like, how do you add like the character?
Well, I'm not exactly sure. I just feel like one time I asked my teacher, she was like marking my music and she was like this part is the climax. And I asked her like, how do you know? And she looked at me. She was like, do you think there's any markings on the text? Do you think Bach actually wrote this in? Like, no, but it's just because like you can kind of tell from the phrasing. And also, the one of the more interesting things that I think is like, especially because in Baroque music there's like some repetition, right? Pianists will play that differently. Like they might like some people like bring out the first phrase and don't bring out the second phrase. Some people do like the opposite. So there is actually like you can have like discrepancies in how you play that, and that's also happens in like some of like I feel like the Chopin nocturnes because like the main thing returns a lot. But every time you play that theme, you have to play it differently and like you can choose different ways to play it differently. But in terms of like what to bring out in voicing, like well, I feel like the first thing is to like achieve a balance between your three lines. So that would be like important. And also like figuring out where your phrases stop and end is like a large part of that because it's like you can kind of figure out like the climax of each point based on that. And especially because the key changes are very noticeable. It's not like Dvorak where you like change keys every like 3 seconds. Like the key changes are very like drastic and noticeable and therefore you can kind of like figure things out based on it.
Now that we've talked about so many wonderful things, we're unfortunately reaching the end of our time. So I was just wondering, could you share some of your like closing thoughts? What's a final message or word of advice or just something that you want the listeners to keep in mind?
As a kid, I didn't like particularly like music, and that is like a true confession that it's not very good. I kind of regret it now that like obviously I'm in high school, but I feel like it was very like love-hate relationship for me because like I feel like when people ask me like what do you do? Like I would obviously say music because it was like a staple of my life for so long. But like especially like after like doing competitions and like losing some of the competitions, I would be like do I want to say that? Because like I thought it was like embarrassing to say that you do music, but like you're not actually good at it. And then I just like like I feel like we kind of talked about this. At one point, you just have to like cut your losses because I feel like nobody like truly dislikes music. Like it's so impossible to do that. Like at what point do you just realize that the main point of music is not to actually like win? Because if you go about it from that standpoint, then you're always just gonna be inferior. Like there's always gonna be like a person or multiple people or like that are like will always beat you in everything and you could spiral so badly and just like use this as a justification to not practice enough or like be like oh I have to like have other interests besides music but like at some point you realize like it's not even good for you like you're not making yourself happier you're not making your parents happier you're not making your playing better if you just like go into that mindset so it's like like what do you want to do with music like for me I feel like I would not be able to successfully have a career in music, but I still like I really enjoy it. So like it would be like a thing that I would want to pursue in my free time, but maybe like not my actual career, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to like be like all in or all like or completely like out, I guess, of music. You can have like a balance. But like you also have to just like know yourself like the main thing is just being able to understand like where your limits are. And like sometimes it's like very painful to have to like go through that and be like I'm not good enough for this because like nobody wants to hear that and especially like nobody wants to hear that from themselves because if you hear someone else say that to you, you could just be like I could prove them wrong, but like once you actually like understand where you are at and then you say to yourself like it's not probable like, it takes a bit to get over that, but I think, like, once you do, your relationship with music is a lot better.
This is like crazy for me to listen to because I feel like so many of the things you're talking about are realizations I had like much, much later in life. And the fact that like you know all of this so early, you're just like such an incredible thinker and I really admire the way that you think about things and that you like apply these things to your own life. So thank you so much. I learned so much from this session. And I'm so grateful to have been able to talk to you about this. And thank you so much for everyone for listening. Please be on the lookout for the next episode, which will be released next week.